Hey there, and welcome back to the Equipping ELLs Podcast. I am Beth Vaucher, and I'm thrilled to have you here for the third episode in our series on narrowing our focus to better support English language learners. We've already covered listening and speaking, and today we're diving into a domain that often might feel like the biggest hurdle for our ELLs and maybe one of the most important, which is reading. We'll explore why reading is essential for language development, some common challenges your ELLs might be facing, and of course, I'll be sharing 5 easy routines that you can implement to help your students become stronger and more confident readers. So let's jump right in. So let's talk first about why reading is essential in language development. Reading is more than just decoding words on a page. It's about comprehension, right? We want to create readers. We want to create students that enjoy reading, that learn so much information independently because they're able to read. So it's really about comprehension. It's about vocabulary building, and it's about developing academic language. For our ELLs, reading is a critical bridge between oral language and written communication. So we really want to create strong readers that help our students to really expand their vocabulary, internalize language structures, access academic content, and also improve their writing by seeing models of good language use. There's such a strong connection between reading and writing. However, reading can be particularly challenging for ELLs because it requires them to simultaneously decode text, understand new vocabulary, and make sense of complex grammar structures, often in a language they're still learning. Let's be honest, reading in general for the majority of students is tough, right? It takes a long time to really develop the skills. And then we add in the language component as well with our ELLs. And that's why this is a really hard domain to work on, because a lot of times it just takes patience and a lot of really explicit instruction on phonics skills, we're going to get into that in a second. But first thing is be patient with your students. It takes a lot of time. There's so much that's going on in their brain as they work on their reading. So give them the time and space they need to develop both language and literacy skills at the same time. Now, some barriers to reading that your students might be experiencing are things like limited vocabulary, right? Without a strong word bank, even simple text can feel really overwhelming. Also, lack of background knowledge. Many texts that we use in our schools assume cultural or contextual knowledge that some of our students just might not have. And that really can inhibit their reading skills and understanding. Decoding difficulties. English phonics rules can be confusing, right? It's the most difficult language. There's the most phonemes in the English language. So it really is a difficult thing for our students to learn to access these new rules. A lot of times that maybe don't make sense right away. A lot of times have a lot of irregularities, especially for our students whose home language have completely different systems. So sometimes, yes, the transfer between Spanish phonics and English is a little easier because Spanish is a very phonetic language. But when we think of our students who speak Mandarin or Arabic, it's a very different alphabetic structure and phonics structure. So that is you're working with a brand new template for your students when you're teaching them your English phonics rules, and not to mention how many of them there are, right? And then last, just the comprehension struggles that can sometimes happen with our ELL students. So even when they get past the decoding part and they've really developed those skills, understanding the meaning behind the text is another hurdle, right? There's so much inferencing that happens and just different types of language skills that are represented in the higher level text that they are going to see, that sometimes we need to be really mindful to give them that support if they don't have that contextual background. Knowing these challenges helps us design lessons and routines that support ELLs at every stage of their reading journey. Now, before we dive into our routines, I want to help you identify where your students need reading support, because this is what I have found to be one of the key pieces that is causing teachers to feel really overwhelmed on how to support their students, because the reading journey is a very long journey, right? And so we need to be able to pinpoint where on this journey are our ELL students at so that I can start there and help to really build a strong foundation. Because it doesn't make sense to be working on decoding CVC words if your students still are not strong in knowing their letter sounds. So we need to really identify where your students are at and then give them a lot of support in a lot of different ways at that stage they're at. So here are some areas that you can pinpoint to see what kind of support your students need. First, you can assess decoding skills. Okay, so you can listen as students read aloud. Do they struggle with sounding out words? Are they even able to read aloud yet? Are they approaching words? How do they approach words if they see a word they don't know? So really identifying, starting with simple CVCs or going to more complex if they're past that, and really identifying what stage of the journey are they in when it comes to phonics and decoding. Now, I would say even before that, if you have students who are new to working with the English alphabet and working on letter sounds, work on those letter sounds. The more that they can hear it, the better. But even before that, one of the most powerful ways to really support your English language learners, and something you're probably already doing in your classroom, is to incorporate phonemic awareness activities. And these are things that really can be done orally, where they're playing with sounds, they're manipulating words, they're breaking apart words. And that's how they're going to feel confident and comfortable in playing around with English phonics skills in a very stress-free way, right? A lot of it is oral, so they're not going to have to do anything independently. They're doing it as a class or a small group. So start with phonemic awareness and see how your students are doing with that. Are they able to rhyme? Are they able to segment words? Are they able to count syllables of words? And what's great is you could do a lot of this and make that connection to their native language. Because think about Spanish, for example. How many words are rhyming words in Spanish? They have a ton of rhyming words. So start there and show them some words in Spanish that are rhymes, and then bring it into English and see if they understand the concept of rhymes. But taking the time to play around with words and sounds orally is going to be a strong help for them to when they move into, learning the sounds of the alphabet, moving into decoding and skills like that. Another check-in, if your students are past the decoding stage, they're becoming fluent readers, is to check for vocabulary knowledge. So this is really something that can be tricky to understand and to check in with your student. How one little word can really take your students onto a different path of comprehension. And so the more that we can analyze and observe and check in on their comprehension, on their vocabulary knowledge, and help to correct any misunderstandings they have, that's really important. A lot of words can look very similar when they're reading, but they're very different in meaning, right? There was once a student I had that was working on the word buoy, but she read it as boy. Well, those are two very different meanings, right? It's going to change completely the comprehension of what you're reading if you read buoy as boy. And so just being mindful of that, doing different vocabulary activities, doing different exit slips where they can write about a word that they learned that day in their reading. And it helps you to check in for accuracy of their vocabulary. And then you want to check for comprehension as well. So if students are, again, in that fluent reader stage, you want to be asking them a lot of questions about retelling or explaining the main idea or summarizing, finding key details. That's how you're going to help to see what's going on inside their head as they're reading. And the more they get into those routines of doing things like retelling or summarizing and using those graphic organizers that can help support them with that, the better they're going to become at that skill, and for you to be able to check in on comprehension. Now, you also want to check on fluency. This is another part of the reading process, right? It's a long, long journey. You want to pay attention to the reading speed and expression. Now, what you want to keep in mind is to not mark them down if they maybe have an accent. So be mindful of that, of just really looking for the accuracy of words and the speed of their reading over their fluency might be inhibited because of accents that they have. And then lastly, a great way to see and check in on your students' reading is actually through writing responses. So having them do a short response, I love to do dictations to just see where they're at with their phonics skills and applying those phonics skills into their writing. That's such a powerful way to check in and see what sounds that they've really mastered and are applying independently. Where are they still struggling, and how you can come alongside and help them. By identifying which part of the reading process your students find most challenging, you can tailor your instruction and implement routines that target the specific needs. Because like we've said, reading it's a very long journey. You cannot fit everything in. But when you know and can identify where your students are at, you can then create a space where you can work with small groups on specific skills. You can have centers. You can have different activities set up so that your students are getting more specific support on the reading skills that they need help with. Now, I'm going to share with you 5 easy routines that can strengthen reading skills. So you can start to put these in the back pocket and bring them out throughout the day, throughout the week, and you know that you're helping your ELL students increase their reading language domain. So routine 1, and this is probably something a lot of you already do, but I wanted to make sure to make this a point, is pre-reading vocabulary preview. And this is very important because before you jump into a text, you want to make sure to highlight any of the vocabulary words that they're going to come across that they need help with. Now, with our monolingual students, we do this a lot, right? It's a very common thing to do. But a lot of times we pull out those tier 2 words or those tier 3 words. But sometimes with your ELLs, you need to be mindful of maybe those tier 1 words that they need help support in. Maybe looking for some multiple meaning words where you can see that their comprehension might get off track. So have the lens of what do my level 2 group, what words do they need to know from this text that are going to help them prepare to read this text. When you do this, it helps students recognize and understand critical words before they encounter them in reading. It also, for those students who maybe lack some of that background knowledge, it helps for them to have a framework to be built upon as they go now into their reading. It also helps them to kind of alleviate some of those bigger, harder words because they're going to approach it and they're going to already know what it means. And so this is where it's really important to spend that time previewing the text. When I read with my students, I would spend almost a whole class period just getting them ready for the reading. And then their brains are turned on. They are going to be ready to read over just beginning to read right away and not doing that prep work at the beginning. So pre-reading vocabulary preview is a must. Routine number 2, guided annotation. Okay, now if you're working with kindergartners, first graders, this might be a little difficult. First grade, you could start to implement it, keep it super simple. But as you go up in grades, this is something that I think is really crucial for your ELLs. And this is to teach them to annotate as they read by underlining keywords, circling unfamiliar words, and jotting questions or summaries in the margins. And why this is so important is because what our purpose is to help our students become independent and responsible for their own learning. And so doing something like a guided annotation routine where every time they approach a new text, they get into the habit and the routine of circling words that are unfamiliar to them. Because you can't choose every word that is unfamiliar to them. You don't know that. And every student in your class is going to have different words that they're familiar with and that they aren't sure of. And so the more that we can have our students be the ones that are in charge of that, the ones that are circling an area and saying, wow, I really don't understand what's being said here. That helps you to come in and say, okay, let's break it down. How can we simplify this? Let's maybe translate this and see if in your native language, it gives you a better understanding of this complex sentence here. So it just opens up those teaching moments for you because they're identifying what they need help with. And it takes time, okay? So it's going to take a lot of modeling. Do it with simple things first. And really as you gradually release the responsibilities to the students, you're going to see that if you consistently do this in your reading lessons, your students will learn to do it on their own. And like I said, it tees you up for teaching moments because they're telling you exactly where they've got lost in comprehension, where they misunderstand, where they need some support. So routine number 2, guided annotation. Routine number 3, I love this. I think you can do this with all grade levels, all language levels. And this is an interactive read-alouds. Read-alouds to me are one of the best uses of your time when you're short on time, when you're trying to fit a lot in. There are so many incredible, diverse books that our students can see themselves in our books that we choose. So using a really incredible, diverse book, first of all, is a great way to begin because it builds that connection point and it gives your students opportunities to connect, to share their personal stories. They have background about those topics. So first, use a diverse book and then be very intentional with your read aloud. Sometimes I encourage teachers to listen to the whole book first. Maybe pull it up on YouTube and let the students just listen to it first before you start to break it apart. That's really important for our ELL students' comprehension because we want them to understand the whole gist of the story before we start to pause and teach and pause and show a vocabulary word and pause and ask a question. That can really kind of hinder their understanding of the whole book. So I like to listen to it completely first. And like I said, maybe put that on YouTube and maybe don't tell them the ending so that there's still opportunities for them to predict and tell you what they think is going to happen or write about it and make their own ending to the story before you share that. So you can still create that suspense in a read aloud. But then in your read aloud, be super intentional. And we have, I think, 46 interactive read alouds done for you on so many different holidays and diverse topics that you could have done for you. But be intentional. Look and preview the text of read aloud. Sometimes early on in my years of teaching, I would just grab a book off the shelf and say, okay, let's do a read aloud for 20 minutes. But that's not the best use of time. We want to be intentional with the book we're choosing, what we're pulling out of that, identifying only 2 or 3 vocabulary words, identifying a few spots you want to stop and just model and say, okay, let's look at this sentence deeper and really use some mentor text from that. Maybe you want to stop and highlight a grammar skill that you've been working on in your class. So there's a lot of ways, but I want to encourage you to be intentional in the ways you choose to stop because sometimes we can really break up a text because we're stopping way too much. And that's not good for the students. So really be mindful of that and be intentional. It really keeps students engaged and it helps to model comprehension strategies. That's a big part of that interactive read aloud. They're seeing you do the thinking out loud. They're seeing you stop and pause and question. To make it even more interactive, you could maybe print out the vocabulary words, and when they hear that word, they put it up and they hold that card up. Or you could do a lot of think, pair, shares throughout that interactive read aloud. So there's a lot of variety of ways that you're not just going to sit down, read a book for 20 minutes and call it a day. There's so many ways that you can really bring that time alive and make it really impactful to your students. Like I said, I think an interactive read aloud is one of the best ways you can use 30 minutes when you're trying to squeeze in a lot of things. All right, routine number 4 is visual story mapping. So this is after you read a text. I want you to have your students create visual story maps showing key events, characters, concepts. So we want to use a lot of graphic organizers. Graphic organizers are a great scaffold for your students. And I encourage you to use the same graphic organizer consistently so your students really see it and then they're building that in their mind of what to do when they see that. If constantly it's changing and they're trying to spend that time reorienting themselves to what they're supposed to be doing, then that's wasted time. So use that same main idea and detail graphic organizer for weeks and use that same story mapping graphic organizer for weeks, because that's how you're going to start to see if they are able to do it independently, if they're understanding what they're supposed to do. When students draw and label a timeline for a story, a concept map for informational text, or they use a story map to show, for a fictional text, it really helps you to identify if they are following along in the story or if they're able to pull facts and information. It helps to solidify the comprehension, and it does it in a way that's really again, when they're doing drawings and labeling, it's something that doesn't feel like it's too overwhelming to them. Where in comparison to, writing a paragraph about what you just read or doing a long writing piece. So the picture part really helps them to feel that it is doable and they can showcase what they've learned in that story. And then last is routine number 5, daily reading fluency practice. So for this one, I want you to incorporate short daily fluency practice with high interest text. And it really could be reading practice, but it also could be if your students are just at the beginning of their reading journey, doing very short, targeted, purposeful sentences is a great way for them to work on fluency. It really helps them to get over just the decoding where they're decoding every word, but they're seeing the same types of phonics patterns. So if they're on the CVC, giving them, very simple sentences that they practice or build on. I love the pyramid sentences that I've seen out there that really help students to build their fluency, increase their confidence that they are able to read a whole sentence. There is a big gap there between students who feel that they're just able to read one word and those who finally are able to see that they can read a sentence and they can read it fluently. So adding in some sort of fluency practice, maybe that's a warm up, maybe that's an exit slip, maybe it's a station. Maybe it's a roll the dice and they read the sentence that's next to the dice on the number of the dice. There's a variety of ways that you can make it fun and engaging, but adding that piece in, because there's a lot of times I think it gets skipped over, the fluency piece with our ELLs, and it's important that they develop those skills as well. Now, here's just a few other ideas. You could do things like a picture walk, like I said, really spending some time beforehand. You could do a KWL chart, of course, making predictions, just looking at a few pictures, seeing what vocabulary words they can pull out, see if they can piece together a prediction of the story. Highlighting, when you can start to help your students become students, like I said, annotating or highlighting. So if you can help your students start to become students who can grab a highlighter and highlight key vocabulary or highlight words that are new to them, again, we're putting that back on them and helping them become independent learners. I love doing paired summaries. So they could, after each paragraph, students summarize what they read to a partner. That could be something they do orally, and really just help them take that reading a step further to think and process it in their own words and to share that with a partner. Like I said, graphic organizers are a must. Use the same ones. Sentence starters are always a great scaffold. Retelling chains. You can have your students add one sentence to retell the story or text in sequence. So again, kind of working together in groups, you're taking off that pressure that they have to do it all. But that's a great way that you can help them to really work on sequencing and just be responsible to share one sentence out. And then some ongoing things, daily read-alouds, reading journals, where you have students write a short response. Again, anything where you're going to help to have a glimpse at the understanding of where your students are at and check in on comprehension is a good use of time. So these routines and activities provide structure and supportive ways for ELLs to engage with reading every day. We want our reading time to be meaningful and purposeful. And it often can be a challenge for ELLs, but with the right support, every student can develop strong literacy skills. Remember, like I said at the beginning, be patient. It is a long journey. Language learning is a long journey, and literacy learning is a long journey as well. And so we just need to really think and be mindful to keep simple, consistent routines into our daily teaching. And that will give the students the tools they need to become confident, capable readers. Next week, we'll wrap up our series with the final language domain, which is writing. I'll share why writing is often the last piece of the puzzle and give you 3 to 5 routines to support your ELLs in becoming successful writers. Okay, I'm going to repeat that part. So I know this can feel like a lot to be teaching your students language and literacy at the same time, but I want you to take a deep breath and just be reminded that there is so much power in simple, consistent routines that you incorporate into your daily teaching that will give your students the tools they need to become confident, capable readers. Now, we have for you a we've taken these routines and we've put them into little downloads that you can put them on a ring binder, put them in your lesson planner. There's a few different variety of how they're laid out for you. So you can go ahead and download those at inspiringyounglearners.com/reading. We'll put the link in the show notes and you can get your set of those. We also have those for speaking and listening, and we'll put those links in the show notes as well. And then stay tuned because next week we are wrapping up our series with the final language domain, which is writing. And I'll share why writing is often the last piece of the puzzle and give you 5 routines to support your ELLs in becoming successful writers. Until then, try out 1 or 2 of the reading routines we talked about today. Let us know. Send us a message on Instagram at Equipping ELLs. Tag us on Instagram at Equipping ELLs. Send us an email at hello@equippingells.com. Let us know how it's going. Let us know what questions you have. If you're struggling in one of these domains and want more support, please reach out to us. We'd love to hear how it's going. Thank you for joining me today. Keep showing up for your ELLs, and remember, small steps lead to big growth. I'll see you next time.